Sometimes you just like dive into something and you find somebody who really, um, I don't makes you rethink things.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I felt with these notes and audio you sent me about this Craig Perra.
Right.
He's got some pretty radical ideas about compulsive sexual behavior and what he calls healthy sexuality.
Yeah. I mean, what really struck me right away was how Para, he's not afraid to talk about his own struggles at all.
Right.
He's this successful lawyer, he's an executive, he's happily married, he's got kids.
Yeah, you'd think he has it all figured out,
You
right?
would think that.
Yeah.
But then he kind of reveals that he's been battling these compulsive behaviors since he was a kid.
8 years old, right?
Yeah.
Like that just makes you stop and think about, how early these patterns can actually develop.
Totally.
And it really challenges the stereotype of, who we think struggles with these issues.
It really does. And I think that's one of the things that makes his perspective so valuable.
Mm-hmm.
He's not just some outsider, pointing fingers.
Right.
He's been there. He's felt it. He's felt the shame, the despair.
Yeah. He talks about going through years of traditional therapy
Right.
and still hitting rock bottom.
Yeah. And even like getting to the point where he was thinking about self-harm, like he almost lost his wife.
It's heavy stuff.
It is.
And you can like hear it in his voice when he talks about it.
Yeah, totally.
But I think that's what makes his critique of this whole like sex addiction model so interesting, because he's not just like theorizing about it.
He's lived it.
He's been there.
Exactly. And he even points out that like major institutions like the World Health Organization,
Right.
the American Psychiatric Association,
Yeah.
they haven't even fully embraced this sex addiction label.
They haven't.
No, they see it more as like an impulse control disorder.
Okay, so
Yeah.
if it's not an addiction, then how does Perra explain these behaviors?
Well, I think that's where his whole alternative framework comes in.
Right. Yeah.
He argues that like calling it an addiction can actually be really damaging.
Oh,
It kind of traps people in this negative identity
Mm-hmm.
instead of focusing on growth. And I think he believes that a lot of the traditional treatment focuses way too much on the behavior itself
Mm-hmm.
and not enough on the underlying issues that are driving it.
Yeah, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone, right?
That's a great way to put it.
You're treating the symptom, but not the root cause.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he believes that we need a more holistic approach.
Okay.
And that's where his framework of systems, needs, and parts comes in.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. What does he mean by systems?
So he starts off with this idea that we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems.
Mm-hmm.
And he's actually quoting James Clear,
Oh, right, from Atomic Habits.
the author of Atomic Habits. Exactly.
I love that book.
Such a good book.
Yeah,
The idea is that like lasting change doesn't come from willpower alone.
right.
It comes from building the right systems to support healthy habits.
That makes sense. We've all tried to like white knuckle our way through something and failed miserably.
Totally.
So what kind of systems does Perra recommend for building healthy sexuality?
So he emphasizes self-care.
Oh, okay.
Things like, making sure you're getting enough sleep, eating nutritious foods, exercising regularly.
Yeah.
I mean, these might sound basic, but
Mhm.
they really create a foundation for emotional and mental well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're constantly running on fumes and stressed out,
Yeah.
it's so much harder to resist any type of temptation,
Right.
especially compulsive behaviors.
Yeah, it's like trying to run a marathon without training.
Exactly.
You're going to hit a wall.
You are.
But systems alone can't be the whole picture, can they?
Right.
What about addressing like the actual urges and behaviors?
That's where needs come in.
Okay.
Perra believes that every behavior, even a destructive one, is trying to meet a need.
Okay, so instead of just saying like, oh, this behavior is bad
Right.
and trying to just like power through it,
Yeah,
we need to figure out what need it's actually fulfilling
totally.
and find a healthier way to meet that need.
That's exactly it. That's the core of his argument.
Okay.
He uses this analogy of a plant growing towards sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you prune the plant, it's going to keep searching for light.
Right.
Because that's what it needs to survive.
So if we apply that to human behavior, we might be engaging in these compulsive behaviors because we're seeking connection,
Yeah.
stress relief, a sense of control.
It could be any number of things.
Right. But the way we're going about it is ultimately harmful.
Exactly.
Okay, so that brings us to, I guess, another key part of this framework.
Yeah.
Triggers.
Triggers.
He argues that triggers are inevitable and they're not going away.
Right.
But instead of fearing them, we can actually use them as opportunities for growth.
That's the idea.
That's a really interesting way to reframe that whole concept. It's not
Yeah.
about avoidance. It's
Right.
about learning to navigate them skillfully.
Exactly. And that leads us to the final piece of the puzzle parts.
Okay, parts that sounds intriguing. Okay, so is this where we start getting into like the psychology of all this?
It is. Yeah. Perra draws on this idea of internal family systems,
Okay.
which suggests that we all have these different parts within us
Mm-hmm.
that kind of influence our behavior.
Okay.
Think of it like, the characters in a movie,
Right.
each with their own motivations and desires.
Yeah, like you know how sometimes you feel pulled in different directions?
Totally.
Like part of you wants to stay up late and watch Netflix,
Yeah.
but another part of you knows you should probably go to bed.
Exactly.
It's like those parts are battling it out.
They are, and Perra argues that instead of trying to suppress these parts,
Mm-hmm.
we can actually learn to understand them and work with them.
Okay, so if we apply that to like compulsive behaviors, are we saying there's like a part of us that's driving those actions?
That's the idea. Yeah, he calls it the addict part.
Okay.
But he really emphasizes that this part isn't inherently bad.
Right.
It's often trying to protect us,
Oh.
trying to help us cope with, difficult emotions
Mm.
or unmet needs.
Okay, so that's a pretty radical shift in perspective, right?
It is.
Instead of viewing this part as like the enemy,
Right.
we can try to understand what it's actually trying to achieve.
Exactly. So how do we actually work with these parts?
Right.
This is where mindfulness comes in.
Okay.
And I don't just mean meditation,
Mm.
although that can be helpful.
Yeah.
It's really about cultivating a deeper awareness of our thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations
Okay.
without judgment.
So it's about like noticing those urges and triggers
Mhm.
without immediately reacting to them.
Exactly.
Giving yourself some space to choose a different response.
Yeah, you nailed it. Creating that space between the stimulus and the response is crucial.
Okay.
And, Perra emphasizes that mindfulness is a skill that you develop with practice.
Right.
It's like building a muscle.
Yeah.
The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
So we're building up these systems. We're understanding our needs. We're practicing mindfulness to become aware of these parts.
Mm-hmm.
How does this all tie into like the mindful habit system?
Okay, so Perra's mindful habit system is really about bringing all of these elements together
Okay.
to create lasting change.
Mm-hmm.
He argues that instead of focusing on breaking bad habits,
Right.
which could feel really restrictive and negative,
Yeah.
we should focus on building new positive habits
Okay.
that meet our needs in healthier ways.
So it's like instead of just saying don't eat junk food,
Right.
you say, okay, what am I actually craving?
Mm-hmm.
What need is that junk food trying to meet?
Exactly.
Maybe it's comfort, maybe it's boredom.
Could be.
How can I meet those needs with something that's more nourishing?
That's a fantastic analogy.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Perra encourages people to do with compulsive behaviors.
Right.
Instead of suppressing the urge, figure out, what are you getting from it?
Uh-huh.
Is it stress relief? Is it connection?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a sense of control? And then explore how you can get those things in a way that aligns with your values and your goals.
I feel like this is starting to become less about sex and more about just like a fundamental shift in how we view ourselves and our behavior in general.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Perra's approach is incredibly holistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's about recognizing the complexity of human behavior
Right.
and understanding the interplay of our systems, our needs,
Yeah.
and these inner parts that we've been talking about.
So we've talked about building new habits.
Right.
Can you give me like a concrete example of what that might look like in the context of Perra's system?
Okay, so let's say someone engages in compulsive sexual behavior
Oh.
as a way to cope with stress.
Mm-hmm.
Perra would suggest identifying healthier coping mechanisms to replace that behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So this could be exercise, spending time in nature, practicing mindfulness,
Right.
engaging in a creative hobby,
Mm-hmm.
anything that helps regulate emotions and meet that need for stress relief in a positive way.
So it's about identifying those needs, finding the healthy alternatives, and then practicing those new behaviors until they become like ingrained.
That's it. And this is where those systems that we talked about earlier become so important.
Right.
Creating that solid foundation with self-care practices,
Yeah.
like getting enough sleep, eating well,
Yeah.
exercising regularly,
Mm-hmm.
it makes it so much easier to adopt those new habits and stick with them long term.
It's like building a house on solid ground.
Exactly.
Without that foundation, everything's shaky.
It is. And,
Mm.
Perra is also a big advocate for community and accountability.
Right. Yeah. He talks about that.
He believes that shame thrives in isolation,
Mm-hmm.
and having a supportive community can make a world of difference.
Yeah.
Whether it's a therapist, a support group, or just a few trusted friends.
Right.
Having a safe space to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
to share your struggles and your successes
Hmm.
is crucial.
I imagine that can be really validating,
Yeah,
knowing that you're not alone in this.
it really is. And it helps build that self-compassion,
Hmm.
which is essential for lasting change.
Right.
Instead of beating yourself up for slip-ups.
Which we all have.
We all do.
Yeah.
You can approach them with understanding and kindness,
Right.
just like you would a good friend.
So we've got the systems, the needs, the parts of mindfulness habit change, community, self-compassion.
Yeah.
Anything else we need to know about this mindful habit system?
There's one more key element that Perra emphasizes, and that's purpose.
Okay, purpose.
He argues that having a sense of purpose,
Uh-huh.
something bigger than yourself
Mm-hmm.
that you're working towards, can be incredibly motivating
Yeah.
and can really help you stay on track.
It's like that saying, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Exactly.
Having that, like, guiding star,
Mm-hmm.
that reason to keep going
Totally.
can make all the difference.
It can.
But does it have to be like some grand world-changing mission?
Not at all.
Okay.
It could be something as simple as being a loving partner, a present parent, a good friend,
Right.
or even just becoming the best version of yourself.
I really like that this is resonating with me. A lot of what Perra's talking about isn't just about overcoming compulsive behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
It's about living a more conscious and intentional life in general.
I think that's a great point. I think you're right. I think that's one of the most powerful things about Perra's work.
Yeah.
It's not just about, addressing this specific issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, cultivating a deeper understanding of ourselves and our behaviors
Right.
so we can create a life that feels truly aligned and fulfilling.
It's like he's giving us a whole new toolkit for navigating the human experience, and
Yeah.
not just the challenges, but also like tapping into our potential for growth and transformation.
Exactly. And what I think is really refreshing is that he doesn't present this as like a quick fix solution.
Right.
He's very clear that, this is about deep lasting change.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes time and effort.
It's a journey, not a destination, as they say.
Right.
And I think that's a really important point to emphasize, especially in a culture that's so obsessed with instant gratification.
Totally. Perra really emphasizes that this is a lifelong process
Mm-hmm.
of continually refining our systems, deepening our self-awareness,
Yeah.
and cultivating that compassionate relationship with ourselves.
Right.
It's not about reaching some perfect state of being.
Right.
It's about embracing the, messy, beautiful process of growth.
That's such a relief to hear.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off.
It does.
It's not about being perfect. It's about progress, not perfection.
I love that progress, not perfection, because let's face it, we're all going to stumble along the way.
Oh, yeah.
There will be setbacks, challenges,
Mhm.
moments when we fall back into old patterns.
Right.
But the key is to approach those moments with self-compassion
Yeah.
and use them as opportunities to learn and grow.
So if someone's listening to this and thinking like, wow, this all really resonates with me,
Yeah.
but I don't even know where to begin, what would you suggest as like a first step?
I think the most powerful first step is simply cultivating that awareness that Perra talks about.
Okay.
Start paying attention to your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Notice what triggers those compulsive urges.
Okay.
What needs are you trying to meet through those behaviors?
Yeah.
And don't judge yourself. Just observe with curiosity.
It's like becoming a detective of your own inner world.
Exactly.
Yeah, uncovering those patterns and motivations that have been operating under the surface.
And once you start to understand those patterns, you can begin experimenting with healthier alternatives.
Okay.
Can you replace that late night scrolling with a relaxing bedtime routine?
Mm-hmm.
Can you swap that sugary snack for a piece of fruit and a mindful walk?
Right.
It's about making those small incremental changes
Yeah.
that over time can lead to really profound shifts.
I think a lot of people might be surprised by how empowering that can feel. Taking control of your choices, building those positive habits, and starting to feel like you're actually the author of your own story.
It's incredibly empowering. And remember, you don't have to do this alone.
Right.
Perra really emphasizes the importance of community and support.
Yeah.
Find a therapist, join a support group, connect with friends or family members
Mm-hmm.
who can offer encouragement and accountability.
That sense of connection can be so vital,
It is.
especially when you're facing challenges.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together.
We are.
We all struggle, and that support is available.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We really dove deep into Craig Perra's work
Mm-hmm.
and this mindful habit system.
Yeah, it's not just about overcoming compulsive sexual behavior. It's about cultivating a more conscious,
Right.
intentional, and fulfilling life overall.
It is.
Well, before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought, something to ponder as they continue on their own journey of self-discovery.
What really stands out to me is Perra's emphasis on viewing even our most challenging behaviors with compassion and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
He reminds us that these behaviors are often, misguided attempts to meet needs, to protect ourselves,
Right.
to cope with difficult emotions.
Yeah.
So as you reflect on your own experiences, ask yourself,
Mm-hmm.
what needs are those behaviors trying to meet?
Yeah.
And how can I meet those needs in a way that aligns with my values and supports my overall well-being?
That's a powerful question to sit with.
It is.
And remember, this is a journey, not a race.
Right.
There's no finish line, no perfect destination.
Yep.
It's about embracing the process, the ups and downs, the stumbles and triumphs, and continuing to learn and grow along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And remember, you have the power to shape your own story, and the resources and support are out there to help you along the way.